I moved to the Grand Rapids area in the summer of 1991. At the time I worked for IBM, and despite thinking it was going to be one of those 3 years and on to the next place, like so many people in Grand Rapids, I'm here more than 20 years later and have really made this my home. I've not typically lived in larger cities that had very well developed public transit systems. And in fact, Grand Rapids is probably the first place where I've really had a broad awareness of public transportation as a regular option for my own day-to-day use. The primary thing is I just like to limit the amount of driving that I do. That's in part because of the expense of driving. I also find that I like the way my day starts when I don't have to begin it in traffic. So it's a lot more convenient, and it's a gentler start for the day, I guess, if I can read a magazine or catch up on yesterday's newspaper rather than worrying about and wrestling with traffic first thing in the morning. For me, riding the Rapid is definitely a choice. And it's a choice that's driven in part by an awareness of a desire, I don't know a better way to describe it, to live more gently on the planet. I read that somewhere once, and it's an interesting way to go about the day, to think in terms of how can I have a smaller footprint? How can I avoid consuming fuel? Or how can I share the consumption of fuel with 30 or 40 other folks who are making a similar trek on a daily basis? So for me, it's a personal choice to live differently. And then a side stream benefit is just being a part of this wonderful community of people who ride the bus. And it really is, it's a community. Every one of these routes is like a neighborhood. And the bus driver's kind of like the block captain for that neighborhood. So it's kind of neat. It brings people together. There's something about hopping on, say for example, Route 15 to go from downtown to Knapp's Corner. The neighborhoods you pass through and the folks that are getting on that bus at different stops are people who might not otherwise come into contact with each other. Certainly if each of them was getting into their individual vehicle and driving to or from work or the grocery store, they wouldn't have the opportunity to interact. And so one of the benefits that I see of public transportation is this way of kind of reinforcing this idea that we're all in this together, and there are things that affect all of us, and it's hard to overcome that awareness when day to day you see folks on the bus as you're all going to the market or going to the store or going to work or headed to the farmer's market, whatever the place might be. There's something that's connectional, I guess is the best way to describe it. I've lived in 2 or 3 different places throughout the community in the 20 years I've been here. I made the intentional decision to move back into the city of Grand Rapids about, so it'll be almost 3 years ago this fall. And one of the factors was the desire to have the opportunity to use public transit on a more regular basis. And so that drove the decision to move into the city, helped to drive to the decision as to where in the city I would live in terms of convenience to amenities in the nearby neighborhood, as well as access, convenient access to public transit. The way that I view the role of public transportation in bringing people here is in the way that as people arrive in Grand Rapids, there are questions and things that they will begin to ask about this community as they evaluate the opportunity to have the life that they'd want to live here. If you'd asked me that question 10 or 15 years ago, I would have said, well, those questions revolve around things like the arts. People have a sense for what kind of community it is by what kind of arts are available. What's your symphony program like, and what are the visual arts like? And I believe more and more, particularly as we're beginning to be more aware of sustainability, and we've got a great heritage within this city now of sustainable building, for example, as those things come more to the fore, then the availability of public transit will become one of those things that people begin to ask about in the same way they ask about entertainment and the arts and sports and the other kinds of activities that are part of a well-rounded life. The thing that strikes me as people talk about light rail, and I've had conversations with folks for a long time, say really, from an infrastructure standpoint, all of the things that you need for light rail, you also need for a bus system. And so if you have the access to the right-of-way For a fraction of the cost of tracks and infrastructure for light rail, you could have fully functional service with the bus. And so when I look at it from a cost benefit standpoint, we're probably closer than we think to being able to really have what I'd term kind of that blue sky ideal bus system within this community. I ride the bus because that's what people do when they live in a cool city.